¿Qué tal, chicos? Mi nombre es Juani. This one verb will make your Spanish sound a lot more natural, and the cool thing is it's really simple and easy to learn as well. And that verb is the verb SOLER. Now, the verb doesn't have a direct translation in English. However, it's used to describe in Spanish habitual habits or routines that you do on a regular basis. Similar to in English, how we use these particular words, the words usually, and when you say I tend to do something. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, Hawani, I don't really need to learn the verb. I can just use words like normalmente or generalmente or regularmente, which is true. You can use those words instead. However, all I can say is that over the last 5.5 years of my Spanish journey learning Spanish, what I've really noticed is that native speakers will oftentimes use the verb instead of using words like normalmente or regularmente, for example. So if you want your Spanish to sound a lot more natural, using the verb is the best way to go. And the cool thing is, it's very simple and it's a very easy verb to learn. Now, with that being said, let's jump into some examples. I tend, or I usually, go to the gym 3 times a week. Suelo ir al gimnasio 3 veces por semana. Suelo ir al gimnasio 3 veces por semana. Great, now let's unpack everything and break it down. First thing, you'll notice that we're conjugating the verb your form when we say suelo. You'll also notice that the verb in this context is irregular as well. So yo suelo in the present indicative tense. We've also got the verb ir to go. Now, as we've mentioned in previous videos, when we're forming compound phrases in Spanish, we can leave ir unconjugated in its unchanged form simply because everyone in Spanish already knows that we're talking about ourselves. One other thing you'll also notice is that I've said 3 veces por semana, 3 times a week. Another way of expressing that when you want to express how many times you do something throughout the week, you can also say 3 veces a la semana. So 3 veces a la semana or por semana. Let's try another example. I usually or I tend to eat dinner at 8 o'clock at night. Suelo cenar a las 8 de la noche. Suelo cenar a las 8 de la noche. Let's unpack everything once more. So again, you'll notice we are conjugating the verb form, yo suelo. We've also got the verb cenar, to eat dinner. And we're also saying 8 o'clock at night, a las 8 de la noche. If you remember a few videos ago, we mentioned that when you're giving a specific time in Spanish that you do something, we have to say de la noche. So de la noche in this particular case. I hope that's starting to make sense. If you haven't clued onto it yet, the formula is very simple. We're simply conjugating the verb and then we're simply plugging on another verb in its infinitive, unchanged form when we're expressing habitual habits or routines. Let's go for another example. I usually or I tend to run in the mornings. Suelo correr por la mañana. Suelo correr por la mañana. So if we break things down again, conjugating the verb to your form, we're then using the verb correr to run. Notice though how I'm not giving you a specific time that I normally run. So in this case in Spanish, we'd have to say por la mañana, so por la mañana, or as I mentioned a few videos ago, depending on which country you're in, which Spanish-speaking country you're in, some countries you can say en la mañana, similar to how we do it in English. Moving on, let's try an example now in the tú form. For example, do you usually study at night, or do you tend to study at night? Sueles estudiar por la noche. Sueles estudiar por la noche. Again, if we unpack everything here, this time we're conjugating the verb in the tú form, sueles. We've then got the verb estudiar, to study, And then because we're not giving a specific time of the night that we're talking about, we'd say por la noche. Por la noche. Or as I mentioned before, depending on the country you're in, you can say en la noche. Before we jump into some exercises, let's try one more example in the do form. What do you usually, or what do you tend to do on your days off? ¿Qué sueles hacer en tus días libres? ¿Qué sueles hacer en tus días libres? Again, conjugating the do form, we've then got the verb hacer, to do, and then what do you usually do or tend to do on your days off? Great work, everyone. I think it's starting to make sense. Now, the next step is to try some exercises before we go out there and start trying to use the verbs in our Spanish conversations. So we'll jump into some exercises now. You know the drill. I'm going to give you a sentence in English and I want you to translate it for me into Spanish. Again, I'll give you 10 seconds. If you do need more time, of course, feel free to hit pause on the video. And of course, if you are getting any value from these videos, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. First example, I usually or I tend to visit my parents once a month. So I usually or I tend to visit my parents once a month. How would you say that in Spanish? This time you'd say, suelo visitar a mis padres una vez al mes. Again, suelo visitar a mis padres una vez al mes. So again, conjugating the verbs in the yo form, we've then got the verb to visit, visitar, and then we've got the personal a, which we've spoken about in previous videos. So, suelo visitar a mis padres una vez al mes. Next example, how would you say in Spanish, do you usually or do you tend to cook every day? So, do you usually or do you tend to cook every day? This time you would say, sueles cocinar todos los días? Sueles cocinar todos los días? Great work. Let's see if you can get the next one. How would you say, my friend Juan usually or tends to study with me? So my friend Juan usually or tends to study with me. This time you'd say, mi amigo Juan suele estudiar conmigo. Mi amigo Juan suele estudiar conmigo. So my friend Juan usually or tends to study with me. Great work, everyone. As always, if you have any questions or anything that I can help with, please don't hesitate to put a comment in the comment section below. And besides that, I will see you in the next one. Hasta pronto.